Here we go. I was at Philadelphia, and it took my looking at it a couple of minutes ago to feel the full impact of the historic moment that at Philadelphia you had gathered some of our country's minds who were at least in touch with the 9/11 truth that I don't know what the common denominator was in addition to that, but you got some good people there, and you did have a opportunity to present in a historic location right there by the Liberty Bell the appropriate way America should be thinking instead of the debate last night, that we have a bunch of painful truths to face as a whole people, and you proposed a way to for America to take back their government, to give you full credit. And I liked your 5 points. You know what I did? I already went ahead and rewrote your 5 points.
That's wonderful. We want to have full participation.
Here's how I put it: that you want a united front to come together on the proposition that we should impeach Bush and Cheney, and in particular, that among the reasons that have already been acknowledged, that the 9/11 truth reason be up there front big time as a way of magnifying the enormity of how bad these guys are. And that truth, you know, as you try to argue with people in the street about 9/11 and they say, no, our government couldn't be that bad. I mean, the other side of the coin, that our government is that bad, that is the flavor of the impeachment plank. And I had a little trouble that the 9/11 is at the end of the 5. So I was trying to combine 1 and 5, which is just, what do you call it, sniping or snipping or, you know, big deal. That's small talk. Anyhow, the next point that I thought was important was we should end all wars immediately, just bring all the troops home. And while we're at it, we ought to study William Bloom's revelations about how evil the empire's been all along, that all that talk about bringing freedom and democracy here and there is, you know, the opposite of the truth. Do you get excited about William Blum's book too, Webster?
No, I'm afraid my enthusiasm for him is contained, because this is again a left gatekeeper who stubbornly refuses to say anything about 9/11. I had a chance to see him at the Irvine, California conference lately. Can I just propose a different method?
Yes, go for
it. Maybe we just go back a little bit and we can eventually rejoin the path that you're taking.
Okay.
This is Webster Tarpley speaking. I would like to thank my good friend Joe Friendly, first of all, for the chance of appearing here on Truth for a Change and to bring this very important, critical emergency briefing to friends in Manhattan and far beyond on the internet. Our starting point is an intelligence analysis which I've developed myself, but which is shared by quite a number of other authorities, and that is that as we go into the period now of the summer, July and August, and in particular perhaps the congressional recess during the month of August, we're entering into a phase of heightened danger of war, of a general war in the Middle East, perhaps leading to a world war. The starting point for this is not some terrorism in the usual sense, but it is state-sponsored terrorism, false flag terrorism, carried out under the auspices of the Dick Cheney faction. When in this briefing I refer to Cheney, what I'm referring to, of course, is not just one aged alcoholic who can't shoot straight, who's had 3 heart attacks and 4 pacemakers and a quadruple bypass and a nagging wife and so forth. I'm referring to a powerful faction of Anglo-American financiers and intelligence people and special operations types, and that would be the faction ultimately led by George Shultz, by Rupert Murdoch, that has included people like Tony Blair and the Bush-Cheney regime here in the United States, and of course it speaks through things like Fox News. And their policy seems to be, as we've known it now for a couple of years, the Cheney Doctrine, which is to stage a new Gulf of Tonkin provocation and or a new 9/11 war provocation, perhaps using weapons of mass destruction, most likely inside the United States, and then ride that provocation to a wider war in the Middle East through a nuclear attack on Iran, a nuclear sneak attack on Iran, which will usher in a phase of international anarchy going far beyond anything that we've ever seen in our lives up to now. A couple of days ago, a congressman from Massachusetts named John Oliver received a group of people, his constituents, lawyers were quite numerous among them, who wanted his help in the effort to impeach Bush Cheney, which of course is a true grassroots effort coming up spontaneously all over this country. Oliver replied that he had no intention of doing anything to impeach Bush Cheney, and he offered the information there would soon be a United States attack on Iran, and that would be followed by the imposition of martial law dictatorship inside this country. Let us remember what Dick Cheney blabbed about when he got into one of his hyperactive phases last spring. He said that in his view, the greatest danger to the United States is a new 9/11 occurring with a group of terrorists armed not with airline tickets and box cutters, but with a nuclear weapon in the middle of one of our own cities. Just a couple of days ago, the London Guardian reported that the faction fight inside the Bush White House has been resolved in favor of the Cheney-Ack war party, against the wishes of other people, perhaps with some hesitations, such as Miss Rice, Defense Secretary Gates, and certain of the NATO allies. And essentially the conclusion is that Bush and Cheney, of course, who is the operative part of this, are determined to start a war with Iran before Bush leaves office in January of 2000. If we have a coup d'etat and the current regime is frozen in office permanently in the same way that Aznar of Spain wanted to do this. Let's suppose the first one is Chertoff, the cadaverous Secretary of Homeland Security. A couple of weeks ago, Chertoff was visiting the editorial board of the Chicago Tribune, and his basic message was that the U.S. faces an overwhelming increased danger of attack in the so-called homeland in the summer of 2007. Now, this is a wild fabrication by Chertoff. This is a provocation. He knows what he's doing. He's lying. He's making it up. He's doing this in the service of a war plan. Chertoff said, "I have a gut feeling that the nation faces a heightened chance of attack this summer. I believe we are entering a period this summer of increased risk," said Chertoff. When asked, why is that? He said, well, summertime seems to be appealing to those terrorists, and we worry that they are rebuilding their activities. And I think that idea has a lot of attraction to the desperate demagogues of the Republican Party, who know that if there is a normal election in 2008, they're likely to lose everything. The White House, there are lots and lots of their seats in Congress, and so on. Now, based on what Chertoff has said, we now have a special interagency working group inside the White House, which meets every Friday afternoon at 1 p.m. The FBI says that they have a list of 700 alleged leads, and they're pursuing them. A lot of the hysteria that's being used to mount these kinds of operations comes, of course, from the London terror events, if we can call them that. 2 cars found in London with some explosive material in them, and 1 burning car at Glasgow Airport that was shown by the cable television networks mercilessly, one after another, all afternoon, one Saturday. My caption for that one is, and New Yorkers will appreciate it, I hope, 1 burning car means a good day on the Cross Bronx Expressway. But in the world we live in right now, 1 burning car is supposed to stop the world, and that became the basis of new hysteria in Britain. Right now, Britain is on its way to becoming a police state. If you followed the recent conflict between Britain and Russia over the extradition of some intelligence people from Russia that the British have been trying to get, you have to remember that Great Britain, in many ways right now, is a bigger police state than Russia at the present time. And we have to remember, of course, that for many, many decades, MI5 and MI6 were cynically setting one bomb after another in London, signed by the Irish Republican Army the Irish Republican Army provost, the real IRA, and so forth. And it turns out, in retrospect, that at the top level, the councils of the Irish Republican Army and these other variations were top-heavy with agents from MI5, MI6, British military intelligence, and so forth. All of that has been proven by reports of the British government. But strangely enough, when these events take place, nobody points to that in the U.S. news. Another element of proof, we have the Toronto Star, the biggest selling newspaper of the serious type, at least in Canada. Some weeks ago, they published an interview with Lieutenant Colonel Doug Delaney, who is the chair of the War Studies program at the Royal Military College in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. That is, of course, a NATO intelligence center. In Canada, there's a great deal of concern about the rising level of losses of Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan. And the summary that's given in this article of the remarks coming from Lieutenant Colonel Doug Delaney is that it may well be that the key to bolstering Western resolve in places like Afghanistan and Iraq will be another terrorist attack like 9/11 or the London transit bombings of 2 years ago on the 7th of July, 2005. If no terrorist events take place, says Lieutenant Colonel Doug Delaney, it will be harder to show that the Canadian presence in Afghanistan is really necessary. In other words, the mood is now growing in these intelligence circles that it's time to gin up a new false flag, state-sponsored synthetic terrorist atrocity to get the hysteria, to get the political leverage in order to grind down the rising spirit of popular resistance, which we see in the impeachment movement, the rejection of a rule that is now based on fear and irrationalism. Let's hear another voice in this. People may remember the former Republican senator from the state of Pennsylvania, Rick Santorum, a notorious scoundrel who did everything he could to hang on to power at all costs. He just told a radio interviewer that between now and November, a lot of things are going to happen, and Santorum said, I believe that by this time next year...
Hello, woo! Okay.
Talking about. Now, probably the centerpiece of evidence that's going to be used in the effort that we're now looking at is the National Intelligence Estimate, right, the NIE, which represents the collective product of 16 intelligence agencies, starting with the FBI, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, the State Department Intelligence Unit, there's an intelligence unit inside the Department of Energy, and so on down the line. Now, according to this National Intelligence Estimate, we don't have the entire thing, but what we have is a declassified summary. And what they say is the following, that Al-Qaeda and its branches around the world are striving to infiltrate more and more operatives into the United States for terrorist attacks on the U.S. homeland. And I'm just quoting briefly from this report. Although we have discovered only a handful of individuals in the United States with direct ties to Al-Qaeda and their senior leadership since 9/11, we judge that Al-Qaeda will intensify its efforts to put operatives here. Again, this is the declassified summary of the current National Intelligence Estimate on terrorism. And it goes on to say, as a result, we judge that the United States currently is in a heightened threat environment. This is another piece of fakery. It has been produced under the supervision of Admiral Michael McConnell, that is the current U.S. intelligence czar, after his predecessor, Negroponte, had conflicts with Cheney over evaluations of intelligence. It turns out that Negroponte, bad as he was not bad enough for the job, so they got somebody worse, and that is Admiral McConnell. Among Admiral McConnell's credentials, 10 years at Booz Allen Hamilton, the premier private military firm, and in many ways one of the most sinister military firms, implicated in a whole series of dirty operations. We got to go back and see where this guy McConnell came from. January 7, 2007, Raw Story reported that McConnell is a puppet and asset of Cheney, and he's held in contempt by intelligence professionals. CIA old boy Vince Canestraro said that McConnell was a disaster. CIA veteran Larry Johnson called McConnell a very weak manager who was sure to cave in to Bush Cheney on all the relevant issues. Now, the fabrications from this new intelligence estimate have obviously come from Cheney's office as well, from people like David Addington, the neocon fascist madman who runs Cheney's office. He used to be Libby's Libby. Now that Libby has been at least convicted of a felony, if not sent to jail, the office is run by Addington. We've also got to point to the convicted felon in Iran-Contra, Elliot Abrams, who is now one of the most powerful personalities inside the Bush White House, running policy on the Middle East, a convicted felon pardoned by Bush the Elder in December 1992. Abrams has a very sinister military aide, General Kevin Bergner, whose specialty is to fabricate stories of how the Iranians are intervening inside Iraq. Now, we've heard also from CIA veteran Philip Giraldi, a well-known writer of the American Conservative, one of the people who first called attention to the Cheney Doctrine some 2 years ago. According to Giraldi, when the National Intelligence Estimate talks about high-impact plots against the U.S., he said this is a tour de force of misinformation and disinformation disguised as fact. And he says, it is possibly no coincidence that there's been a significant increase in the anti-Iran rhetoric emanating from the Bush administration and the Congress over the past few weeks, mostly seeking to establish a casus belli, a reason for war, a pretext for war, by contending that Iran is masterminding lethal attacks against U.S. troops in Iran and NATO forces in Afghanistan. Now, when we come to Iran, it is clear that the George Shultz, Rupert Murdoch, Dick Cheney faction of the Anglo-American ruling class is obsessed with a war psychosis that revolves around Iran. On July 10th, the Pentagon announced that it would send another aircraft carrier battle group, that of the USS Enterprise, to the waters off Iran. That would make 3 carrier battle groups, and it's thought that there are going to be 1 or 2 aircraft carrier battle groups not so far away on the other side of India in the Bay of Bengal, within striking distance after a couple of days of scheming. And this means that we will soon have 3 attack carriers within striking range of the Iranian targets. The Pentagon has followed up with another statement saying that soon they'd only keep 1 battle group with an aircraft carrier off Iran, but that can simply be deception and propaganda. And in the meantime, you're going to have 3 carriers ready to attack. We've also had a hysteria stoked by the Washington Post, the Reuters news agency, and much of the press. On July 10th, they published satellite imagery, overhead photos, spy plane photos of suspected nuclear facilities near the Iranian city of Natanz. Mohammed El-Baradei of the International Atomic Energy Agency talks about the new crazies. Now, that would be Cheney. Among Cheney's other gambits is an attack by Israel on Syria rather than directly on Iran. There's been a flurry of reports coming from people like Dennis Ross, another neocon here in Washington, that there's a much heightened risk of war between Israel and Syria during this summer. And this is now the theme of a press campaign inside the Israeli press. It is interesting that there are other voices inside Israel that are skeptical about this. On July 11th, an anonymous leaker from inside the Israeli military intelligence warned the Israeli public that a war with Syria would be 10 times worse than the defeat that the Israelis suffered at the hands of Hezbollah last year in the invasion of Lebanon in July and August. We've also got the Cheney faction preparing the option of an attack on Pakistan. Now, this is the very midsummer of neocon madness. The charge here is that Osama bin Laden is being harbored by the Pakistanis in the so-called short order, depriving the U.S. of a key terrorist asset. Of course, all of this makes a mockery of any claims of a U.S. war on terrorism. And finally, we've got the problem of the danger that faces the U.S. soldiers inside Iraq, 160,000 of them now massed north of Baghdad in the center of the country, landlocked with a 400-mile supply line that goes straight across the Iranian front. Jim Michaels in USA Today says that attacks on convoys, and this is, of course, the Achilles heel of the U.S. position, because all water, food, fuel, ammunition, medical supplies have got to be brought in by truck convoys. Michaels points out that the attacks on these supply convoys have tripled. There were 281 attacks in 05 to 06, and in 06 to 07, the figure goes up to 869 attacks. In the background, we've also got the question of dollar hyperinflation. We've got a 15 to 20% devaluation of the entire U.S. banking system, minimally coming up as a result of the mortgage-backed securities, subprime mortgage lending area. The dollar has just hit an all-time low against the euro, $1.40 to buy a euro, and a 26-year low against the British pound. We may be facing hyperinflation on the 1923 German model, where you go to the store with your money in a wheelbarrow and you bring back what you buy in your pocket. So the U.S. situation is tragic. What can be done about this? Well, the Philadelphia Platform calls for a regroupment of all forces of goodwill, that is to say, the peace movement, the anti-war movement, the impeachment movement, the anti-globalization movement, labor, civil rights, civil liberties, people who don't want a dictatorship, people who want to get an honest vote count, and so on down the line. Be they conservatives, be they libertarians, leftists, progressives, independents, students, formerly apathetic, now coming back into politics. And essentially the task is to unite on 5 planks. Impeach Bush Cheney immediately. Stop all wars, including Afghanistan. No confrontations with Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, or anybody else in the world. Roll back the domestic dictatorship. Make it clear that people rule this country, not cliques of bankers. And finally, 9/11 truth. And on the basis of this, it's time to support candidacy. Cindy Sheehan is providing an important example by declaring her candidacy for the House seat there in Sacramento, California, currently held by the failed Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, whose treachery now knows no bounds. And it's important that other people imitate that example. If you don't have that much time, you can form a 9/11 Truth Squad and intervene into the ongoing presidential primary campaigns. If you only have an hour or two, you can call in to one of the big radio talk shows and get some 9/11 truth and some truth on these other issues, the new 9/11, Cheney's planned August coup, and get that on the scoreboard. So essentially what we're calling for is action. The reality of the present situation is it's time to get active or you will be radioactive. Again, this is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington. I'd like to thank my friend Joe Friendly of Truth for a Change for being able to bring you this briefing, and I urge you, don't despair, but become active. Thank you very much.
You know, before you hang up, Webster, let's see if anybody's knocking on the door. Maybe we can
I can't,
talk.
there's nothing I can do about this. I mean, I can't know it.